In this video, which is part 2 of our 2-part series on the fundamentals of manipulating text in C#, we're going to look at the properties and methods of strings that we can use to manipulate text. We're also going to talk about what's the difference between a static method and an instance method. So once again, I've created a Visual Studio project with a bunch of code in it, and we'll just step right into it, see how it works. All right, so we have our main method as usual. I'm going to make a string called greeting. The greeting is the traditional greeting, hello world, right? And I want to know how long is that string. Well, I could just look at it, right? But suppose I had computed this string in some other way and I didn't know how long it was. I can say greeting.length, and that will put into this variable the length, right? Which is 12. So this is an example of a property. A property in C# is something like how long is this thing? What color is this thing? What price is this thing? What is this thing's name? Right? The value whose property you are reading or writing, some properties are writable, is called the receiver. And the reason why it's called the receiver is, again, for sort of historical reasons, this comes out of the very beginnings of object-oriented programming. In object-oriented programming, you often ask objects, you ask values for a property associated with them. And one way to conceive of this is that the value, the object that you're talking to, is receiving a message. You are sending it the message, I would like to know your length. And it sends you the message back, my length is 12, right? So this guy is called the receiver for that historical reason, right? And the syntax that we have here is we have the receiver followed by a dot, followed by the name of the property, right? Now we also have methods. So we have a receiver here, and then we have a method, toUpper, right? We've got some parentheses here. I'm not quite sure what's going on with those parentheses, but let's just explore here and see what happens. What did this write out? It wrote out, hello world. Apparently it's shouting. It's gone into uppercase. All right, so this is a little bit like a property in that we had the receiver and then a dot and then the name of something. But we have these parentheses here. Let's just see what happens if we take the parentheses out. And we'll stop the program, and we get a red squiggly. And if we hover over that thing, it says, OK, first of all, it says string.toUpper is a method. It provides a string, right? So this is a bit confusing. It says string.toUpper. The first string is the result of this thing is going to be of type string. The second is string.toUpper is a method. What does it do? It returns a copy of this string converted to uppercase. And then it says, argument 1 cannot convert from the method group to bool. What the heck is going on here? This is one of the most confusing error messages in C#. And I get this question from beginners all the time. What is going on here? OK. Well, first of all, this expression is called the argument to console.writeLine. And we'll talk more about arguments and parameters and what all that means in a later video. But console.writeLine has 19 different overloads. There are 19 different versions of console.writeLine. You can just call console.writeLine with no arguments, and it will just write out a blank line. You can give it a bool. You can give it a character. You can give it a bunch of characters. We'll cover what that means in a later video. You can give it a decimal, and so on. There are 19 of these, right? And what's happening here is C# is saying greeting.toUpper is a method, but I don't have enough information to figure out exactly which method it is. And it looks like you're not even calling the method. You just want to pass the method, right? Console.writeLine, one of its overloads takes a bool. I don't see any way to convert this thing to bool, so I'm going to tell you, right? Very confusing error message. What it really should be saying is greeting.toUpper is a method call, and therefore it needs parentheses because the parentheses indicate that there are going to be arguments passed to this method call. And again, that may not be super clear right now. We're going to talk about all of that in much more detail in a later video. Right. The takeaway is if you see this confusing error message involving method groups, odds are good that you forgot to indicate that a method was being called with these parentheses. All right, so let's. I stopped the program there, so let's put a breakpoint here. Right, now, what happens if I've written out greeting.toUpper. What if I just call greeting.toUpper, right? This is an expression. It's an expression of type string. What's going to happen, right? Suppose I now attempt to write out greeting, or if I just point at it, it still says hello world in mixed case. It's not in uppercase. And the reason is, you remember when we pointed at this thing, I'll just stop this for a moment, right? It says returns a copy of this string converted to uppercase. And that returns a copy is the key point here, right? The method is handing you back a new string, a new completely different text value. It is not changing the value that is stored in greeting, right? Now, suppose you did want to change the value that was stored in greeting. Well, you know how to change the value in a variable. You assign to it, right? So we can start this back up again. Greeting.toUpper does nothing. We write that out. And now we say, OK, greeting is equal to greeting.toUpper. And now if we write out greeting, you'll see we can just point at it, that it's now become the uppercase version. People are sometimes confused. This looks a little bit strange, this business of saying that something is equal to itself with a method applied to it. But after you do it a few tens of thousands of times, it becomes very natural to think about it this way. You are just simply making an assignment of the value of this expression into this variable, right? The fact that this expression concerns this variable doesn't matter. All right, so some methods that we saw take no arguments, right? This guy has just an empty arguments list. Some methods do take arguments, right? So there's a method on greeting, on strings, called substring, right? And as you might imagine, it produces a subset of the characters in that string. Well, let's see exactly what it does. Greeting, recall earlier, we assigned it to the uppercase version of hello world. Substring 0, 5 produces the string hello. Well, what's going on here? I'm just going to stop this for a moment here and use IntelliSense to try to figure out what's going on here. OK, so this says, first of all, it returns a string. The method is called string.substring. It takes two integers, the start index and the length. OK, and now suddenly this starts making sense. The text says this retrieves a substring from this instance. The substring starts off at a specific character position and has a specific length. The start index is the zero-based starting character position of the substring in this instance, right? So this thing is 0. We're going to start at character 0, which we know from previous experience is the first character. And then it is going to take 5 of them, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to take these 5 characters. If instead we said 1, 5, right, then we can probably figure out what this thing is going to do. Let's find out for sure. All right, so now it is ELLO, comma. Right? So it started at the second character, character 1, right? And it took 5 characters after that. All right, strings can also be compared for equality. So I could have 2 strings, name 1 and name 2. They could be Smith and Jones. All right, and then I can try to compare them to see if Smith is equal to Jones. And that's false. All right, they are not equal to each other. Now, what if I did this? What if I try to say, is this string, Smith, smaller than the string Jones, right? Well, we've got a red squiggly here, so something is wrong. We'll point at it, and it says, operator less than cannot be applied to operands of type string and string. What's going on there? Well, you remember how strings are Unicode values and that they can be drawn from any alphabet in the world. That's a lot of alphabets, and it is a difficult problem to take any 2 strings that can be drawn from any alphabet in the world and say which one is in alphabetical order bigger or smaller than the other. It is a super difficult problem, and there are a lot of different ways to do it in C#. And because of that, It does not allow you to use the less than or greater than operators on strings. All you can do is equality. And equality simply means, are these strings exactly equal? Do they have exactly the same characters in exactly the same order? Right? Now, the way that you can do string comparison in C# is, it turns out that there is a method called string.compare. Now, you'll notice that the receiver of string.compare, and also in a previous video we saw string.format, and we saw console.writeLine constantly throughout this series. Those receivers are all types, right? They are not expressions that evaluate to a particular value. They are a type. And methods like that we call static methods, again, for historical reasons that are not particularly good. The methods that where the receiver is an actual value are called instance methods, and that makes a little bit more sense. There's actually an instance of a string there, right? There's a specific string, right? It's very easy to accidentally use the syntax for a static method when you intend to use the syntax for an instance method and vice versa. But the error messages are pretty straightforward. You should be able to figure it out no problem. So anyway, there is a static method called string.compare, right? And it takes two strings, as it says here, string A and string B, compares two specific string objects, and returns an integer that indicates their relative position in the sort order. What is the sort order? There are a lot of different ways to sort things. You can sort things based on culture-sensitive rules, right, where you say that E with an accent on it is the same as E without an accent on it, right? We don't want to sort things on the basis of where that E with an accent happens to fall in the Unicode table. There are also ordinal sort orders, where we simply say, we're just going to compare these solely on the basis of what the numbers are. Right? The string.compare method uses a sensible comparison for whatever locale that your computer is presently in. Right? So right now I am in the United States of America. My computer is set up to have an American operating system defaults installed on it, and so it would choose the American default string ordering here. Right? Now, this returns an int. Right? What the heck is up with that? Well, let's run this thing and find out. All right, so when we get here, this says the comparison is 1. So the problem here is that we have three possibilities, right? Either name1 is greater than name2, or name1 is less than name2 in whatever the sort ordering is that we're using, or they're equal. And a Boolean can only have two values, true and false. So we have three possible things. We only have two possible values in a Boolean, so therefore we can't use a Boolean. So unfortunately, the choice was to use int. And again, this is traditional. This goes back to C and C++, which also use a similar mechanism for comparing strings. If the integer is positive, then the one is greater than the other. If the integer is negative, then the one is smaller than the other. If the integer is 0, they're equal. Now, you'll notice I did not say if the integer is 1, then one is greater than the other. Or if the integer is -1, then one is smaller than the other. And the reason being is the comparison algorithm is actually allowed to return any positive number or any negative number, and some of them do. None of the Microsoft provided ones do. They all return either 0, 1, or -1, like a sensible comparison operator should. But there are some third-party comparison operators that will return -2 or -3 or -100 or whatever for reasons of their own. All right. And finally, I want to talk about one more interesting instance method. Here we have a number, 1, 2, 3. Everything in C#, well, almost everything, there are a small number of things that don't, has an instance method called toString. And if you call that instance method, then unsurprisingly, you get a string out of it. Right? All of the numeric types, Boolean, char, string itself has a toString method. That one doesn't do very much. All of the built-in types have a toString method that does something sensible. And in fact, if you are concatenating a number, right, 1, 2, 3, let's say, to a string, we saw that what happens is that thing gets converted into a string, and then the two strings are concatenated together. Behind the scenes, what's happening is the toString method is being called. Summing up, you can use IntelliSense to discover methods and properties of strings, integers, any other type you want. Instance methods have a value as their receiver. They have an expression that has a value. Static methods have a type as their receiver. And we saw that with the toUpper method, the string was not mutated by the call to the method. Rather, a new value was produced. The variable was not mutated.